Well, hello, everybody. I'm Jessa Frost. I'm the program director at a place called North House Folk School. If you haven't joined us at North House in person, I look forward to the day when you can do that. But we are a folk school modeled in the Grundtvigian tradition, located in Grand Marais, Minnesota, right on the shore of Lake Superior. In fact, where I sat today to get started with a few things, I could hear the lake kind of lapping at my feet, and I was indoors, so it's a pretty special place. Typically, we are hosting lots of classes and welcoming students to campus all year round. Obviously, this year that looks a little different, and we have, to use a very COVID phrase, pivoted to doing lots of online programming and looked out to other nonprofits to connect with. So this is part of our Winter's Gathering series. Winter's Gathering is an event that is supported largely by our members. We have a membership challenge going on right now called the Snowshoe Challenge. If you've never been a member of North House, or you are going to renew your membership of $25 or more, they will all be matched. So if that's something of interest to you, you can check out our website. I'll put a link in the chat for folks who are interested in doing that. It's a great way to support the school and support this kind of programming as we all try to stay connected through the next several months, which could be, I think, staying connected and hearing stories from afar is going to be a really important part of what gets us all through probably a pretty long winter. So it's my pleasure tonight to welcome Marlene Wisuri and Nathan Moose, who are with the Sami Cultural Center, which is located in Duluth. It's a wonderful nonprofit that is run entirely by volunteers and is devoted to telling the stories of the Sami, the indigenous people of Northern Europe, specifically of Scandinavia, and the stories of their descendants who immigrated to the United States and have continued to practice their culture in lots of different ways here in North America. So we are so glad to have them here to highlight a particular story. One of the things North House is really invested in doing more of, particularly in light of the events associated with George Floyd and our whole societal effort to engage in more of a reckoning with our complex history, is to find ways to highlight the stories of Indigenous people and Indigenous craft. And so Marlene and Nathan are helping us to do that with the story of the Sami this evening. And I'm just so glad that they were willing to share this story, which is completely fascinating, and I can't wait for you all to hear it. So it's my pleasure to have them here. I'm going to turn the reins over. A couple of just kind of housekeeping notes. We will take questions at the end. This is a webinar format, so if your video isn't appearing, that's okay. It's not supposed to, because there are over 100 people here, so it's too many boxes. So instead, you can sit back and not worry about appearing on screen. And when you have a question, you can drop it into the area that says Q&A, which you may have to move your mouse, or if you're using a tablet or phone, kind of hover over the bottom of the screen. Use that Q&A. You can put a question in there anytime, and that helps us keep track of them and not lose them in chat. So we will ask questions at the end of the presentation, but you can drop them in there at any time. If Zoom goes kaput or some sort of global internet crisis happens, fear not, we're recording this presentation and we will post it on our website in the coming days. And so you can revisit it and finish it up and watch the rest of it at that point, or pass it on to anybody that you'd like to share it with. So I think that's all my Zoom housekeeping notes. I'm going to turn things over to Marlene and Nathan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessa. It's a real pleasure for us to be here with the North House Folk School tonight. I've had the pleasure of being able to attend the Winter's Gathering a number of times, and it's been a wonderful occasion and so much fun, but I hope we're going to have some fun tonight too. This gives us kind of a unique opportunity. Of course, the Sami Cultural Center, which is located in the lakeside neighborhood of Duluth, Minnesota, has been closed since middle March, and we just don't have any plans for opening again soon because our the state of Minnesota is closing down again a little bit stricter, so we won't be going back. Excuse my telephone ringing. I thought I hid it somewhere, but apparently, apparently not. So one thing I'd like to do tonight, before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that the land that we operate from, it was the homeland to first the Lakota and then the Ojibwe native populations, and we are respectful of the fact that we are definitely on their land here. We're going to start out tonight with Nathan doing a little yoik.
Octapote yodle la yolo lo 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 le la yolo lo 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 le la yolo lo 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 le la Octapote yodle la yolo lo 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 le la yolo lo 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 le la yolo lo 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 le la le la le Octapote yodle la yolo lo 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 le la yolo lo 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 le la yolo lo 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 le la Octapote yodle la yolo lo 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 le la yolo lo 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 le la yolo lo 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 le la le la.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
Tonight we're going to bring you part of the story of the Sami Reindeer people of Alaska, which is a very interesting part of our history that's not very well known. And we'll talk about the Sami that were hired in Norway to come to Alaska to teach reindeer herding to the native populations there. And we want to emphasize tonight that this is only a kind of a small part of the story that we'll be telling you tonight. It's a kind of a rambling big tale. It has lots of ins and outs. And one of the things that we won't be presenting tonight, because we're presenting this from mostly the Sami point of view, and one of our board members, Pearl Johnson in Alaska, is working on the story from the native point of view. And we hope that perhaps sometime we can expand this whole presentation into a series of classes about the story, because it's got a lot of elements, you know, gold rushes and reindeer being herded across the tundra to Canada and beyond, and reindeer being used to bring food and supplies to miners, and on, many parts to this story. So keep in mind that it's just kind of a small one at this point. So a small part that we're going to be presenting. Well, let's see here. Why that's not. We want to start with just a couple little slides here of introduction about who the Sami people are. And many of you are probably quite familiar with this, but just in case there are people who don't know too much about the Sami, they are the people of the sun, is what the Sami call themselves. And the name Sami, meaning the people, can be spelled in a number of different ways, as you can see here, depending on the language that's being spoken. And the Sami are the indigenous people of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and the Kola Peninsula of Russia. The homeland of the Sami is called Sapmi. And here we have a couple of maps, one of which is a geopolitical map here with Norway, Sweden, Finland, and the Russian Kola Peninsula. And these are the areas that the Sami currently occupy in Scandinavia and Finland and Russia. And over here we have the map that was done by Hans Ragnar Matheson, and it shows the Sami lands as a land without borders. And Hans Ragnar's map is the names and so on the map are the Sami names for the places, which we don't often get on these other geopolitical maps. This map was done around 1975, and I think if you see pictures of Sami homes, every Sami home has one of these maps on the wall. And these are the mountainous regions of Sweden and Norway, and the areas that would be the Sami homelands. The approximate numbers of Sami people, they're estimated to be up to 100,000 Sami in the Nordic countries, most of them living in Norway, which with up to 50,000 in Norway, and maybe more in the neighborhood of 20,000 in Sweden, 5 to 10 in Finland, and a smaller amount in the Kola Peninsula of Russia. There are also probably, and this is just sort of a guesstimate based on immigration figures from those countries. So we estimate that there could be up to 30,000 people in North America with some Sami ancestry. Now, all of the figures here for Sami populations are sort of approximate, depending on differing definitions as to who are actually identified as Sami. And that varies with the different Sami parliaments in the Nordic countries. And over here, we don't have any really good way of telling for sure who is Sami, because many of the Sami descendants lost their ancestry when they came to this country, and their ancestors assimilated into the larger populations of Norway, Sweden, and Finnish immigrants. And the Sami ancestry was often hidden or not recognized, not acknowledged. So at any rate, this is just a little bit background information before we get started on this story. And I'll turn this over to Nathan now to start some of the story here.
Well, thank you, Marlene, and welcome to everybody who's in attendance. We're telling a big story with broad strokes here. A lot of the reindeer for the Alaska Sami project, well, the Alaska projects, which were intended to work with Alaska natives, were brought originally from the Chukchi people, Chukchi Peninsula of Russia. Starting in 1891, some reindeer came over, and some Christian mission stations had been started in Alaska. And the reindeer is closely related to the caribou, same species, different subspecies. They can and do mate in Alaska. The males are bigger, of course. Both male and female have antlers, and the North American caribou is a bigger animal than the reindeer. And is wild will not be domesticated as the Eurasian reindeer will be. Okay, so we're going to quickly introduce 4 individuals, and there's more of them too. These are not the only project leaders, but these are important people in the story. Sheldon Jackson, a Presbyterian minister who was appointed the director of education in Alaska, thought not just by himself, others did too. If we worked with Alaskan natives and brought reindeer to Alaska, perhaps the native Alaskans would adapt or be interested in reindeer as a food source and also an occupational thing. And Native Alaskans are not we're not farmers or into domesticated animal husbandry. So it was a new idea, okay, that Sheldon Jackson and others brought. We have William Hjelmen, who answered an ad in Norwegian American newspapers from Sheldon Jackson saying, hey, is anybody interested in this idea? William was from Norway. He is Norwegian and Kven meaning Finnish-speaking Norwegian family, and which often have ties to the Sami. And he was familiar with reindeer and the Sami language, Finnish and Norwegian. And he was sent to recruit in 1894, previous to 1894, and the 1898 group, the both important groups. He recruited in Finnmark the Sami participants and their families who came over in both of those groups. And he was one of the project leaders. Michael Healy, to our right, is the person who was in charge of the boat in 1894, etc. That brought, and also he was involved previously in bringing reindeer from Alaska or from Russia over to Alaska. An interesting thing to note about Michael is that he is African-American, mixed, and a ship captain, a very important person at his time. And I think that's worth noting. Tulla Brevig was a Norwegian Lutheran minister who was appointed to Alaska to work on the Seward Peninsula with the Norwegian Lutheran folks, and in that group, certainly the Sami groups as they came over. So he was their Lutheran pastor, and the Brevik Mission is a town, a small town in Alaska with bearing his name. Anyway, these are VIPs who were just getting a little bit of introduction to.
An interesting thing with the Brevigs is that every picture that you see them in, they are definitely dressed in native clothing. So they really must have adapted to the lifestyle there.
And then just to know, we're going to take the questions at the end, just to know. Okay, location. Well, we've got Alaska in several maps here. And we have the Seward Peninsula at the top. The Seward Peninsula, and right there, is the real center of where a lot of this history evolved from, took place. Of course, Alaska was bought from Russia in 1860, I think it's 1868. I can't see the last initial, or yeah, 1868. Okay, so on the right, we see where those Christian missions, which were somewhat administered by Sheldon Jackson at the time as Minister of Education, and each mission had a different Protestant denomination which worked with that mission, and they had usually had reindeer. So you had Presbyterian, Moravian, I think Methodist, Lutheran, Swedish Covenant in the north, and Norwegian Lutheran in the north. So it's worth a mention. And again, the Seward Peninsula, by far, the greatest part of this history and the concentration of a lot of what happened in the history. Okay, just to mention, the Chukchi people sent a delegation of just a few Chukchi with one of the groups of reindeer that they had sent over from Russia, and the decision was made to employ and get the Sami, especially from Norway. There were some Sami from Finland and other participants, by the way, in these larger groups. But this is the core of the 1894 group, which was the real test group. And they were families, which is interesting. You've got 1, 2, 3 little kids, a couple of dogs, 4 little kids, and 13, can't even see it because of these.
13 men and women.
Okay. 3-year contracts to teach reindeer herding. Now, we're going to look at a map in a minute of their route, but this is taken obviously soon after their arrival, because they're all still wearing the Norwegian Sami gakti. Go ahead. I'm guessing this picture was probably taken in Seattle. Okay, so our first group, Bossikap, is a part of what today is called Alta, the city of Alta, northern Norway, in Finnmark, where the participants were recruited and brought together for the 1894 and 1898 groups. And we're following the red line for the first group. Both of the groups went through New York City and went across by rail, by railroad, and got to Seattle. Okay, so some of the photos certainly are taken in Seattle. A few of them are taken on the way, and then a good number are taken in Alaska. But I'm very interested in their side trip to San Francisco in 1894. They spent 13 days essentially in what is now downtown San Francisco. So they saw huge buildings that were made out of marble and steel, and just amazing, that are still look a lot like 1894. It's pretty amazing if you can think of it. They stayed at the Norwegian Seamen's house, and Norwegian Seamen's Church was there at the time too. Interesting to note. So they've been to New York, Seattle, San Francisco, and then they're going all the way up to Wales in northern Alaska, if you can imagine, in 1894. Must have been some kind of trip for them, with families and dogs and sleds and all of that. And doubling over to 1898, a much bigger group, huge group of Sami compared to the 1894 group. So logistically, getting them all on rail cars and, you know, like any other big trip with a big ship passage from Norway, you know, it's quite an undertaking to consider it.
We might note, Nathan, that they did stop in the Twin Cities. They came through Minnesota,
Yeah,
by rail, and there were newspaper accounts of them coming through Minnesota during those trips.
yeah, definitely. So, and they also brought some reindeer with them, just to say that. We'll see a picture in a little bit of them in Seattle at the Woodland Park Zoo, what is today the zoo, but yeah. So they had animals with them too, and dogs. So quite an undertaking. Unalakleet in 1898 and Haynes in the past map are northern Alaska, of course. Okay, here we have on the way to Teller Reindeer Station, which was a mission station initiated, I'm guessing, by Sheldon Jackson and company. The Kemi family, Samuel, Kirsten, and baby Samuel. Again, we know they've got on warm clothes, that's for sure, but it is the traditional Sami clothing called gakti, and down to the boots, they got the whole thing.
And traditional cradle board for the baby.
Yes, traditional cradle board for the baby. We see those pop up in a few of the photos. Yeah.
They're very similar to the Ojibwe Tikinaugans.
Yeah. Okay, now I really enjoy this photo because we've got the Inupiat Native Alaskans on the right side. The apprentices is my very best guess. And on the left, the Sami who were asked to be their instructors and work with them on a daily basis, introducing reindeer husbandry. And the mission, as it were at the time, was to see if Native Alaskans would be interested in reindeer husbandry. They're definitely in the caribou culture of North America. So would they be willing and interested in the reindeer, the close cousin, which they were. And a similarity of native cultures as well. Kind of a worldview that I can't go into in a short term and just try to describe, but if you think of first peoples of the world, we would definitely include Native Alaskans and Sami both. And I would say that there was definitely the kind of things that the Sami were teaching were lassoing, making various crafts, milking the reindeer. I'm not even getting everything in because I can't remember it all, but this is Teller Station on the Seward Peninsula, 1894. Here we go, also 1894. Looks like we've got a cabin and crew and, you know, Alaska living at the time.
And their dogs are in almost every picture. The dogs were a really important part of the herding process.
The dogs are important because they work with the animals, and and that's what they're taught. Yeah, and part of the life. Okay, this picture is interesting for a number of reasons. I think this was taken in Seattle. That's just my opinion. 113 people, 418 sleds, 539 draft reindeer. This is 1898. This is the big group. Notice we've got a lot of the men, Sami, in 1, 2, 3 rows. Every now and there are a few women that pop up in the photo, and even kids. Now at the top, who are these guys that are not dressed Sami? Some of them are Sami too, but they are project coordinators, cooks, interpreters, that kind of thing. Some of them are Finnish or Kven, Finnish speaking Norwegians. Some of them are, like we were saying, cooks, all those kind of things. And generally speaking, I think everybody worked together well. The assistant administrators were chosen by Kjellman and on up top. And almost everybody in this picture, I'm going to just state, probably spoke, all of them, Norwegian, Sami, and now they're getting a grasp of English and Inupiat. So the linguistics for these people are simply amazing. If I miss anything, Marlene, you just jump in.
These are the women and children of the expedition. And this group was hired on 2-year contracts. So they were going to have the option of going back home after 2 years when they had fulfilled their contract with the US government.
A couple of things that I find fascinating on this one. I really enjoy the little kids, like the ones on the far left there. They're just like, do we have to be in this picture? And the women are wearing shawls that are still popular today with plaid. Plaid is still a big deal in the Sami clothing. And then we've got some of the husbands, of course, up at the top, no doubt about it. Nice group photo. Something that they're not all used to. Notice a lot of people are looking away, even they don't want their eyes to meet the camera. Ole Olsen Bar family. This is taken in Seattle, I can say. Woodland Park, yep. And they were in Seattle for a bit. I forget just how long, but they were there for a bit, and all the reindeer were in the what's now Woodland Park zoo area of Seattle. And they're all dressed like herders. They've got the lassos and the whole bit. Okay, Nels Pearson Ball's family on the Revenue Cutter Bear with Sheldon Jackson on the far right. And William Healy, the gentleman I was telling you about, the ship captain, that's his ship, the Revenue Cutter Bear. He's the captain of the ship. And on the right, Balto family. And of course, one of the most interesting and meaningful parts of working with this huge story for now nearly 30 years, Marlene and I and friends of the Baiki North American Sami Journal and other related groups that have worked together, has been connecting with the families today. Where are the families? They're in Alaska. They're in Washington State. They're in California, Oregon, and other places. And they're very proud of being part of this great story. So we'll find Baltos and Bals and all these families in that in those groups, and connecting back to Finnmark in Norway, in Sapmi, who many people in these families have an ancestor or relative who was part of one of the 1894, 1898 groups with great pride and interest. So here we've got daughter Maria Balto, who's got a bag of coins. And the deal was in 1898, when she went to New York and Minneapolis and Seattle, people would want to take their picture. And they're kind of like, what? We're from like a real rural area. We're not used to this, but Maria got the idea, hey, if you hold out a bag, people will put coins in it. They're going to take your picture anyway. So she's ended up with a big bag of coins there. That's the story of that photo, which is kind of fun. Okay, we're switching a little bit of time and place. The Nels Pearson Sara family are actually down by, they're on the Kuskokwim River in the Yupik, Alaska Native area, where Sami also went. So we've got the Inupiat in the northern part, the Seward Peninsula, and then we've got the Yupik following the Kuskokwim River and up from Bethel, Alaska, with little towns there. They've got a log cabin here in one of the little towns on the Kuskokwim River. And at the right, this is a photo I'm not as familiar with, but I think that's Nome. I think that is Nome. And I'm just saying that because I believe so. So we have two different areas. And Nels Pearson Sara, I think that's like, I'm going to say 1903 or right in there, that maybe that photo was taken. Okay, Port Clarence, that's Seward Peninsula there, milking the reindeer. Marit Bitti and Anders Balto. And on the right, we said Nyapi, pardon my pronunciation, but that's a milking ball, wooden milking ball. And that's what she's doing.
We have a really fine example of the milking bowl at the Sami Cultural Center.
Yeah, and reindeer are not milked today like they were at that time. And then cheese would be made with it, as well as cream, and pretty labor intensive. But look at that herd. You start to get an idea of the size of these herds, which these Alaska herds were big, and there still is today reindeer husbandry going on the Seward Peninsula and into Northwest Territories, Canada, and elsewhere. Yeah. So Port Clarence. Okay, the picture to the left is one of the most familiar ones to many of us with this broader history. That's taken in Nome. Ellen Sara in the middle with her siblings. It's right in about that 1910 era. And it must be cold because those little boys are holding their hands like, it's cold. Do we have to stand still for this photo?
And that crate is still in the family, and is now has a repository in Anchorage, I believe. Is that right, Nathan?
What was that?
The cradle board.
Yeah, it's in the Anchorage Museum of History, the cradle board. And I think it last had our great-great-grandkid in it, or great-grandkid, something like that. If those familiar with Lois Stover, that's her family. And the Saar family is a big family, related with Kvamis, related with Twitchels, and I can't even go into all of it, but we're in contact with the families, and this family is very, very instrumental, not just up in Nome, they're down in relatives in Bethel and the Yupik area too, with Yupik family. The photo to the right is a famous photo, and I can't tell you just exactly this minute who they are. Usually I like to have a photo who's identified who it is, but we can say that we learn a lot by even just some of the photos. And with a little work, we could identify who that is too. Okay, so so the Sami were teaching, working with Native Alaskans, introducing reindeer husbandry. There was a hope that English was being introduced in there, that Christianity was being introduced in there, that the modern era, as those people who were, as Sheldon Jackson saw it at the time, was happening. And there was also a thought that perhaps some of the food sources were in jeopardy because of overhunting and some other things. There's a little debate on that. Was there a shortage of food or not? Was it really needed to introduce reindeer? Well, fact is it was introduced. So Sami Pulka sleds, 418 sleds were brought in 1898. And I believe at least a few of them have survived in Alaska. And they're made out of wood. They're like little wooden boats for the snow that the reindeer pull. They're not so common today, used by modern Sami who have a different, the sled to the right is a more popular design, but in any case, to the right, we say Fred Larson Sr., who's carrying the mail in the Nome area in the 1920s. The reindeer were used for mail delivery, gold rush related stuff, military things, related things in Alaska, and milking, and then food and sustenance. So you can see it. And there was reindeer racing going on too, as it was introduced. So I think the reindeer did bring some spice to life in Alaska in the early times, and close relation with the Native Alaskans. Certainly, again, just to say that.
Fred Larson came over on the first expedition in the 1894 expedition, and he was just a teenager. He was like 17 years old, and was the only single person in that expedition. And he stayed on and had a long life in Alaska.
Yeah, now we're going to talk about another of the kind of assistant coordinators, Hedley Redmeyer. Interesting for us because Hedley was a resident of Cook County. had the land where the Cross River Heritage Center is today. He was a fisherman and postmaster in Schroeder, and he was an entrepreneur. He had some other little businesses, and quite an interesting person. He's from Norway. His mother was Sami. His father was Norwegian and probably Kven with Finnish speaking. And he was a cousin of William Kjellman, who we've already discussed as one of the coordinators. So I'm guessing William Kjellman got a hold of Headley in Minnesota and Cook County and said, come on up to Alaska. We could use your linguistic and administrative skills. Because again, these guys spoke Norwegian, Finnish, English, and then would learn Inupiat and Yupik and whatever else was needed. But one thing about Headley, we can see that, that it just points out that there was a lot of Norwegian immigration to the North Shore and up into Cook County even in that early era. Okay, we're really switching into some different territory here. These are epic stories in themselves. Carl Loman and his brother and son and family were Norwegian American from St. Paul, Minnesota. They moved to Nome, Alaska. They were lawyers and businessmen, and they became known as, I think it's something like the Reindeer Kings or something like that. They started an empire of general stores, trading, buying, selling reindeer meat and products. Gold in the Nome area was involved. They made a lot of money. They were, no doubt about it, they were capitalists all the way. Interesting family. One of the things they did, good and bad, and we're not here to say what's good and what's bad, but there were many chapters of who owned the reindeer, were the reindeer serving? Were they serving Native Alaskans? That was the original idea. Were they serving the Sami? The Sami weren't instructors. They were supposed to be able to get one female reindeer a year for their efforts, along with being, their pay and whatever. How about Native Alaskans? They were supposed to be getting something from the reindeer too. And the missions were supposed to be doing reindeer stuff. So it got to be very complicated. Who owned what and how much and who was really benefiting? The Loman brothers bought up a huge part of the reindeer as that went. And that's both good and bad, perhaps. One of the things they wanted to do, which is fascinating, is in the 1920s, they wanted to sell reindeer meat to the lower 48. They wanted reindeer steaks to be on our menu and reindeer to be in our supermarkets. And what did they do? One of the things they did, they helped create our modern perception of Christmas with Santa Claus and the reindeer, all right? They took that famous poem, and that was, I think, published, and then you got Montgomery Ward is involved. Anyway, they had Christmas parades. The Loman brothers had Christmas parades with real reindeer, Santa on a sled, and the people tending the reindeer would be Native Alaskans and Sami, of course. And they went to, I'm going to say, at least 10 major American cities. They were in Atlanta, New York, San Francisco, St. Paul. Here we got Atlanta. And they would send fake stories to the newspapers as if kids wrote it, like, I want to see Santa and the reindeer. So they really shaped our American idea of Santa, the reindeer, and Christmas in the 1920s, and that you too could buy reindeer meat and it was okay to see the and that may be Lois Stover's father to the right here, dressed in the Inupiat or into the Native Alaskan parkie and boots. And I can be almost certain that Santa's either Sami or Native Alaskan. And so are his helpers who are in the back. And
It
look
was
at the
kind of
crowds.
ironic.
It's
Yeah, it was
thousands
kind of
of
an
people.
ironic thing that the Lomans were pushing Santa Claus in order to increase their sale of reindeer steaks in in the U.S.
Yeah.
to sell the reindeer as food while they're doing the pushing the Santa Claus story. It's a pretty interesting story. And one thing that's interesting to me is that the Loman brothers also had a photography studio, and they did, Alfred Loman did a number of extremely beautiful photographs of Native Alaskans, and they can be found online now. It's a really valuable record of the time. And as a photographer, that really interests me.
Yeah, and probably some of the reindeer or the Sami in Alaska pictures were out of their studio too. Okay, so again, we're switching time traveling. We're trying to describe really big things. By 1937, so we're way past 1894 and 1903, and by 1937, there was a movement. It was a reaction to the monopoly, really, that the Loman brothers had on the reindeer trade. The reindeer weren't at the missions as much anymore. They weren't in native hands, and even Sami didn't necessarily even. They had sold. They'd ended up with the Loman brothers. A lot of them. Okay, a lot. Some people thought that was inappropriate. Wasn't the whole purpose of the reindeer to benefit Alaska natives? Yes. But guess who else was interested in this story? The beef industry. Our beef industry, no doubt about it, did not want us in the lower 48 to have reindeer steaks and access that and made into a market. They were totally against it. So it was a combination of the beef industry, those who felt the Alaska natives were getting, the short end of the stick here, and they made an act which was ironically based on Norway, Sweden, which said Sami in Norway, Sweden can own reindeer and practice reindeer husbandry. Otherwise, if you're not native Sami, that's not your profession. And so they made a Native Alaskan law in 1937 that only Native Alaskans could own reindeer. And Sami sold herds at a great loss. It was, according to what we've heard, descendants say it was very painful. Those who had to leave their reindeer herding in Alaska. And there's different sides to it. Now, as you might guess, and you would be right, there was a lot of intermarriage between the Native Alaskans and the Sami. Okay, and kids that didn't have marriages, but kids and marriages, it happened to a great degree, in that we can say in the Inupiat and Yupik nations, which are Native Alaskan nations of Alaska, we find relations and relatives, which is cool. So approximate, and I'm really approximating, about a third of Sami after a while returned to Norway and Finland, especially Norway, to Sapmi. Okay, they returned. A number married into families in Alaska or were related, then they could keep doing the reindeer herding. Perhaps a third, and maybe even a little more. And then a number of people moved to Washington State, especially Kitsap County, which includes Poulsbo, but not only Poulsbo, and Oregon. And sometimes there's a relation with the Laestadian Lutheran Church called Apostolic Church as well, in the Lutheran Church. And anyway, still today, there are people in Poulsbo and in Kitsap County who have Sami ancestry in their families. Here we've got a list of the project families. Now, some of you know Ruth Ann Cecil, who's a longtime Baiki Sami Journal writer and etc. She spent a lot of time working on the Alaska reindeer families, genealogies, and different things. One thing you'll note about a number of the names, and I won't even mention them, but some people will say, well, we spell our name differently. We're so-and-so, okay? A number of the names have 2 and 3 spellings as we see them, and we're not saying even all those spellings are correct. That's what turns up in various sources, which like the Library of Congress books, which were published annually for a number of years about the Reindeer Project. But we'll see different spellings of Bar, Balto, it's Heta, especially too, because the Scandinavian will put the AE together, and we don't do that in English, and have the various dialectical marks over some of the names. Hedley Redmeyer is spelled several ways. Go ahead.
I actually put this slide in just so that people could see that these are family, Sami families where there are a lot of North American connections, where there are definite connections known, and we do know the names of all of these people. They're not lost in time as some of our ancestors are. And we won't spend much more time on this because you can't really read it. But here are some of the reunions of the descendants.
And then just a quick note that we hope to publish in the next year or so, a special edition of Baiki, again, with an emphasis on the Alaska projects. And that will include some of Ruth Ann's best genealogy observations and names and all of that. Okay, we have 2 events here. Poulsbo, Washington.
Nathan?
Yes?
Nathan, just to interject here a minute, we're going to have to move along because we're really using our time up here. So.
Okay, I'll try to talk fast. Poulsbo, Washington, 1998, I think it is. 150 people, mostly descendants of the families, and a big group from Sapmi, Norway, maybe like 30 people, something like that came over. And we had a lot of fun. Myself and Faith Field were there, and it was great. Stories and sharing and etc. Now to the left, in Easter of 2008, we had a gathering where North American descendants of the Reindeer Project and related, I'm actually at the far left there. And here's Faith Field, of course, Lois Stover, and others. It was a great gathering for, we were all related to somebody in the families in Caltacano, so we stayed there and had dinners and cultural events. Okay, we've had the Sami Reindeer People of Alaska exhibit going since 2004 was the first exhibit, which was in Bethel, Alaska, Yupik country. This is one picture here from 2012-13, and we've had an exhibit catalog with a few of the stories and photos shared. And it's been shown at the Yukmuk Aite Museums had an exhibit, and the Norwegian American Museum, let's see, Finlandia up in.
Actually, the Sami Reindeer People of Alaska exhibit is sort of stranded in Hancock, Michigan right now. It was at the Finnish American Heritage Center, opened in January, and the COVID virus intervened and the exhibit is still there. So we're hoping at some point we'll be able to get it back to the Sami Center, where it may go out again to other places. But it's been shown in several museums now in Sweden and Portland, Philadelphia. So it's been around. And the exhibit catalog is available from the Sami Cultural Center. So the exhibit tells the story of the Alaska projects and also includes the live library. And the polka that's shown here at the Vesterheim exhibit is now at the Sami Cultural Center in Duluth. And this is our contact information. And you can see our websites, our email address. Back issues of Bikey are included on both the Sami Bikey website and our website. We've had them all scanned and you can access them there as PDF documents.
Yeah, and just a quick note, really quick, about where the exhibits went. I'm very proud to say that the exhibit went all around Alaska to Alaska local museums, probably about 10 of them in its day with Faith Fjeld, and so that Alaskans could learn, you know, some of their own history. So too.
And there was a lot of collection of information and photographs and so on, a lot of sharing that happened in Alaska.
A lot of family sharings.
Right. And I think we're really running short on time. So if Jessa has any questions, maybe we better get to those.
Sure, that sounds great. Thanks for distilling that complicated story down to an hour. I appreciate it. So let's see, we did have some questions come in as you spoke, some of which you got to. Early on, Amanda made the observation that the Sami culture is often associated with Finland more than other countries. Is there a reason for thinking, but clearly based on the map that you showed, that's not true. Is there a reason for that, or is that a perception that's pretty common?
I think it is a perception that's pretty common, and I think it's because of our particular geography and makeup of people, in that this particular area probably has an overabundance of Finnish people, more so than maybe a lot of the Norwegian and Swedish. So that's my feeling, is that just because of our geographical area being populated so much in northern Minnesota and Michigan with Finnish people that's why it has been more identified with Finland than with the other countries. And maybe the Norwegians and Swedish people are bigger deniers. I don't know of
Well,
their heritage.
one quick thing to just say, the Sami languages are of the Finno-Ugric language family, which includes Finnish and Hungarian and Estonian, which is pretty much a branch of Finnish. So the Sami languages are related to the Finnish language. I'm going to say about a 20-30% correlation of words is still there today to some degree.
Okay, sure. So yeah, linguistically, that makes sense. A question about if you can speculate a little bit, or if you know about some of the motivations that would have led Sami families to make this journey, to take this contract and leave their country.
I'll try to say something quick about it. 1890s was a rough time. There were all kinds of things going on with the border between Finland and Russia, because Finland was part of Russia technically too, and Norway, Sweden, back and forth. There were, closing and this and that, and it was a time of, the modern world is kind of come together, and I think that William Kielman, who went and recruited people, he was pretty persuasive, obviously, and he persuaded people that this was a great venture and they're going to find just an amazing journey to America, and they made that trip.
And this was certainly a time when people from lots of areas of Norway and Sweden were choosing to immigrate as well.
Tough times. And that would have been, imagine the immigration of all Norwegian, Swedish, Finnish. A third to half of those countries moved to North America. So in a way, these are folks that we're talking about are part of the wave.
It's just an incomprehensible idea. I think now that 1 out of 3 people you knew would just pick up and move, never to be seen again. Let's see, lots of good questions in here that you spoke a little bit to. Can you review for us the route that they used to transport the reindeer to Alaska? You showed us how the people came, but the reindeer?
The reindeer came with the people in the boats, on the trains. How else would they get there? They were all with them. They put them on a livestock car, railway,
I think, Nathan, you should mention also that that these were not breeding reindeer that came with them. They were all pack animals, or some. They were not reindeer that were used to actually build the herds in Alaska. Those reindeer came from Russia, from the Chukchi.
True, that's true. So they were mostly male reindeer that came with them, that were to some degree already domesticated to pull sleds and trained to some degree.
And then the breeding reindeer came across from Russia?
Yeah.
But not all the way around?
No.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of stories that we don't have time to tell about. At one point, someone stupidly threw away a whole bunch of reindeer hay, like, who needs this? And then that wasn't there for the animals.
Oh no.
No, you can imagine, it was awful, but let's move on.
Sure. Yeah, Julie Whitehorn asks a really interesting question. What would you say is the biggest misconception about the Sami?
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Thank you, Julie.
Well, that's an interesting one. Some people think maybe the Sami all look a certain way, and that it, you know, like they look Asian or
or that they all are involved in reindeer herding.
that's
But
probably a good one right there. Are all the Sami involved in reindeer herding? And that's
Mhm.
it's really about a 10% because a lot of Sami are traditionally in the fishing, lakes and rivers and coastal, and also small farming. A lot of Sami have been involved in small farming for generations and craft making. And of course, today, Sami are in all walks of life. Um, so, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Let's see, lots of pretty specific questions. To the best of your knowledge, are Native Alaskans still working with reindeer today? And is the sport of reindeer racing, which this Karen notes she's seen in Alaska, connected to this history?
Um, we would wish that we had our friend Pearl Johnson here because she would give us specifics, but actually she's working, as Marlene said, she's working on a program that would be complementary to this one of Alaska Natives' perception of all of this. There is some reindeer herding still going on the Seward Peninsula. And it's had difficulties through the years, up and down. And but it's still going on, and the hopes are that it will continue in some kind of fashion. And even in other areas in Alaska, there are reindeer here and there. And yeah, and let's leave it at that because of time.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Can you speak a little bit more about the Kvens that you were talking about that speak Norwegian and Finnish? Is that, are they also speaking Sami, and is that the same as Finnish?
Good question. Kven is essentially a Norwegian population dialect of Finnish. There were several big waves of Finns who moved to northern Norway because of economics and other reasons. And many of them became related with the Sami. And to some degree, Finnish speaking and Sami speaking were looked down on, you know, by the Norwegian to a degree. And we could say discrimination and some things happened. And a lot of that changed after World War II, because World War II shook up the world and the universe there. And suddenly Sami culture wasn't seen as to be looked down on. And to some degree, the Finnish speaking Kven as well in Norway wasn't, you know, wasn't dangerous. So.
Okay. Yeah.
A question that was asking whether there was a Sami community in Duluth, in Lakeside, and it's the location of the Sami Cultural Center is in Lakeside in Duluth. It's not really I wouldn't say that there's a community, you know, that's that's right around that, but it's that the physical location of the Sami Center is there. Although there are quite a number of Sami descendants in Duluth, but yeah.
And in northern Minnesota, Michigan.
Yeah. Wisconsin.
Yep.
Yeah. Question from Jan. Did the introduction of reindeer contribute to any environmental issues in Alaska?
Interesting question. I don't know that there's a good answer to that, but
Alaska did have a lot of area that was quite suitable to reindeer, you know, just because of its geographical attributes, so that probably the impact wasn't as great as if they had introduced elephants or something, I suppose. You know, it was pretty much going along with you know, the Alaska geography.
Yeah, and I know that in native villages in Alaska where they'd gotten used to the reindeer, they did start reindeer races and had some fun with the animals too.
Carolyn Burkhart, who's a participant here, has indicated she's got some stories to share and some information. So Carolyn, we're going to cross our fingers that Zoom lets us do this. If you want to go ahead and you'll need to unmute your mic down in the bottom left-hand corner. Hi, Carolyn. Thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about what did you want to share?
I'm part of a family that's up on St. Lawrence Island in Alaska in the Bering Sea. And I've been out reindeer herding and hunting up there. And my understanding is that the reindeer were first brought from Russia. And I've spoken with some of the people that went to St. Lawrence Island from Russia. And the reindeer that were originally brought over from Russia, there was some conflict. And I've heard about conflict between the people on St. Lawrence Island and Russia. And that's why they did not, Sheldon Jackson did not continue having people come bring reindeer from Russia. And Russia actually ended up putting up a barrier saying no more reindeer may go over there. And it was after that that they chose to go to Norway and bring the reindeer from Norway. And only a certain number of reindeer were given out to individuals in various villages. And then they did breed them. And that was how they were able to develop a herd, was based on the small number they were given to begin with. And on mainland Alaska, it has over the years been very hard to keep them into a group and herd the reindeer because of the caribou. And those reindeer like to run off with the caribou. And so they've joined many of the caribou herds and it's been interbreeding that way. On St. Lawrence Island, where I'm part of the village, they have a large reindeer herd. It got up to 10,000 at one point. But the problem then was that there were many fawns that were found that were dead. And then a big heavy freeze came in at one point and killed them off. But also there was, I don't recall who it was, maybe it was the Loman brothers or someone came and took, I would say, at least 3/4 of the reindeer and took them and sold them. Nowadays it's owned by the Reindeer Corporation on the island. And people do have to get permits, and it costs about $150 for a permit. And usually a person has to travel a long ways to go for the reindeer. They like being on the east side of the island. And somebody actually told me how they found a pulk there one time. And they also showed me where the reindeer herding area was, where the corral was. There's nothing there now. And they showed me where the reindeer were first dropped off. We went up on snowmobile over there to see that. And then I found out that my sister there, my native sister, we've been sisters since I was 15, that we are actually related because she's part Sami and I'm part Sami. And probably pretty distant, but it's like pretty awesome. And they want to do something with sale of reindeer, but it's very hard for them to sell meat because it's so expensive to get food off the island. And it also can be like in the winter time, it can be a week before you can fly in or off the island. And having the refrigeration and just doing anything economically that way is very difficult. And they have a different way of herding the reindeer. Nowadays it's done with either snowmobile or with four-wheeler. And one of my friend's fathers died about 2 years ago in the wintertime herding the reindeer, and the snowmobile flipped. And they go pretty fast over some very rough terrain. And when my family was, I got the word that the reindeer had been moved close, and they said, "We've got a permit. We've got to get out of here right now. We got to go right now." And they were saying, "No, you can't go. You take too long to get ready." And I said, I'll get ready really fast. Well, okay. And they let me go. And when we're there, he said, now you can't wear sunglasses, you can't wear anything that's reflective, and you need to be really quiet. And because you took so long to get ready, well, now we're not the first ones to hunt. It's basically whoever got there first gets to hunt first. And I got to say, there was the person that was from the missionary was there too, and he didn't understand how everybody had to take turns. But it's done very respectfully there. You get there first, you get to hunt. You've got to wait till that person's done hunting. And so my family did not get to hunt until about midnight, but it was still partially light out. And then then we went over to where the reindeer was on the snow, and doing the butchering was very different there than it was when I was volunteering up in Inuvik on the up in Canada. In Inuvik, they pull the hide off very carefully so the hide can be used. Whereas up there on St. Lawrence Island, they just butcher it off as fast as they can. And they butcher up the meat and put it on the four-wheeler and go zooming back to town. When I was up at Inuvik, it was pulling the hides off carefully. It was wintertime, and you could stack them up and they'd freeze. And it was taking doing the butchering, and it's amazing how the bellies swell up so quickly once they are slit open. They just go like big balloons. And anyway, there's lots to tell about the various stories, and I realize I'm probably taking up time. Something else is coming up here that says Adobe Flash Player. I don't know why it's doing that.
Carolyn, thanks so much. It's really fun to have that perspective.
We're trying to talk Carolyn into doing a program based on some of her experiences. So maybe that will come up sometime in the future.
Yeah. Well, thank you for
Wonderful.
I've got lots of pictures.
Thank you. I also, Pearl, who you've spoken about, who's working on this story from the Native Alaskan perspective, is here and is willing to speak a little bit too. So,
well, awesome.
And I think we'll wrap things up. Pearl, I'm going to go ahead and click the button and hope it works. You'll unmute, Pearl, and you should be set. There you go.
Hello? Okay. Hello.
Can we see
Hi,
you,
we
Pearl?
can hear you.
I don't know. Let me see if I can't find the thing to where you could see me. I don't have the icon.
You might not have that option, but we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. I'm so sorry. What was it that you wanted me to answer or to speak about quickly so I can let you know?
I think they were asking Pearl, we're just talking about some of the reindeer herding now among the native population, and you certainly know more than we do about that.
Well, right now, out of 20 active herds on Seward Peninsula, they're down to 4 that are active. Some of that is due to natural causes. When the caribou migrated out on Seward Peninsula, when they migrated to go back up north, the reindeer followed them, and consequently, at least 6 herders that I can think of lost their reindeer, totally lost their reindeer. And the reindeer are a lot smaller than the caribou, and they can't keep up. The caribou have a huge migratory capability, whereas reindeer stay in one isolated area. They just move around that one big isolated area. They're not runners. They can't run up to the North Slope. So that's why the reindeer are lost. I think that the reindeer herders that did lose to the caribou, they can still get more reindeer. However, I believe that they're allowed to do that through the regulations. Regulations with the U.S. government, this is a very much regulated business here. And, but fortunately, Alaska Natives can still get reindeer here. And of course, there's reindeer on St. Lawrence Island. There's reindeer on Nunivak Island, out in the Aleutians. And there's a herd out of Anchorage, but they're owned by non-natives. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, yes, we do have reindeer herds. However, with COVID, that's cut down the ability for the herders to corral their reindeer in the winter because of COVID. So they have herds, but they're not actively reindeer herding, if you know what I'm trying to say. They haven't been able to, they have a hard time bringing or moving the reindeer, especially in winter. And winter kind of just started here. So
Here too.
yeah. Yeah, it just kind of started. Normally we'd be really having a winter now, but with climate change, our winter just started about a few days ago, actually. So this is a big change for us.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Pearl. That's really interesting perspective to add to the conversation. I do want to wrap up because it's getting late. A couple of things to note. First of all, a huge thanks to Marlene and Nathan for joining us, and all of you who've stuck around. And if you'd like the opportunity to hear more or to stay connected to the Sami Cultural Center or to North House, I just launched a poll. You can sign up for either of our e-newsletters in that poll if you'd like, and then you'll hear from us a little bit more often and can stay connected. I know the Sami Cultural Center North America, as well as North House, is doing quite a bit of online programming, just given the COVID realities these days. We will have another webinar next Thursday night. We do them almost every Thursday. Next Thursday night's topic is puffins of Greenland, with a biologist who studies the birds of migratory birds of Greenland. So that'll be at 7 o'clock next Thursday. Also next week, are also happening, we have our ongoing film festival, the film A Day in the Life of Noah Pictiguk, which is a film about the Inuit and the transition and the forced education. It is available for another 24 hours. You can watch it for free on our website. And then we have a discussion tomorrow at noon with filmmaker Zachary Kunuk, who's a really well-known Canadian filmmaker. That's at noon tomorrow. And there'll be another film available next week as well called This Mountain Life, about Arctic mountain climbing and some other mountain related things. So lots of cool stuff to check out if you are looking for things to learn while you're hanging out at home on the computer. I think that is all I have to say. Marlene or Nathan, anything to add?
Just thanks to everyone who came tonight and participated and stayed with us. And it's really nice to have this opportunity. We're really appreciative of North House to provide us with the opportunities just to at least start getting this story out, because it's as we say, a complicated one, but totally interesting, I think. And so thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, thanks to everybody. I'm gonna let that poll just float out there. If you're interested in signing up for either e-news, please feel free to sign up. Otherwise, have a great night and we'll see you on the internet another time. Thanks, Marlene. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.